all the way from Australia. We have the CEO of the Syndey Opera House in studio. Louise, Herron, thank you so much for making the trip and thank you for joining me in studio.
Thank you so much, Holly.
Let's just jump right in. Tell me about the Syndey Opera House, its latest innovations, developments, programming.
Well, the Syndey Opera House is the symbol of modern Australia, and what we do really matters. So whether it is, for example, last week we had a Global Goals Week where we talked all about our inclusive programs, and it was so very successful. We have a great sustainability goals. People really care about that. And we have recently completed a decade of renewal where we renewed the Opera House for future generations, and people really care about that as well.
What does that renewal look like now?
So what it means, for example, in terms of accessibility, it means that you can get from the very bottom of the car park to the very top, those beautiful sails, without going up a single step. It means that we can turn the concert hall around really quickly, so we can have a symphony orchestra playing, and then we can have a contemporary concert. Bon Iver, like 2 hours later. And that sort of innovation that we haven't been able to have before. Usually it was a very manual process, but now it's very safe and mechanized and very flexible.
Amazing. Tell me how you're using technology at the Opera House now. I know so many people are talking about artificial intelligence, but how do you use technology now? How do you envision using technology in the future?
It's very important to be technology enabled, but what people really love is human experience. So when you think about what happened during COVID, we lost this sense of connection with one another, and connection felt very under threat, and I feel still does feel under threat. So the technology largely wants to be in the background. It wants to make things more efficient, but it does not want to overwhelm the human experience, which is increasingly important.
Tell me what people can expect when it comes to artistic performances coming to the Syndey Opera House and maybe audience engagement.
We spend a lot of time on audience engagement and on providing a huge variety of shows. I mean, it is probably the busiest performing arts centre in the world. We have 7 active stages. We have about 1,800 performances a year, and more than 2 million people buy a ticket to come to see a show or take a tour of the Opera House. So it's an incredibly busy place, and we have a very, very well-oiled machine. People are always thoroughly impressed by being at the Opera House. It's probably not a single performer who doesn't come and say at some point, "Can you believe I'm on the stage at the Syndey Opera House?" You know, it's just such it's a real thing. So everything is elevated by the fact that it's at the Opera House. And what the Opera House does matters because, as I said, it is the symbol of modern Australia.
It's renowned. I mean, it's a UNESCO World Heritage site. It's a global cultural leader. How do you preserve that culture as we move forward?
Well, you have to have very clear goals. And you have to have goals, for example, of how is it that we are going to be future ready? How is it that we are going to be more welcoming to more of the community? Because it is so important that things don't shut down and become elite or exclusive. Right at this moment, what we need is to be more open and more inclusive and have a greater diversity of programming, from our kids' shows, our talks and ideas, yes, all the traditional art forms like opera and symphony and ballet, but we have such a wide variety of performances, so that it doesn't mean that everything needs to appeal to everyone, but we say our ambition is to be everyone's house, so that there is something for everyone.
Yeah, and you're a nonprofit too.
And we're a nonprofit.
Tell me the challenges that come with running a nonprofit of this magnitude, I guess, which that's probably a very long answer.
Well, we're owned by the government, and in Australia, the government is very supportive of the arts. So, for example, the Decade of Renewal program was largely funded by the New South Wales government. So that does make a huge difference. But it is very challenging, say, at a time after COVID. We rely heavily on tourists. You can imagine that 99% of tourists to Australia come to the Sydney Opera House. So when the flood of tourists actually stopped, well, where was our source of revenue going to be? So we needed to be very flexible and adaptable and find ways to bring people in. So an example, going back, Holly, to your question about technology, for example, when COVID hit and shut us down on the 20th of March, by the 23rd of March, we had a program up and running called From Our House to Yours, where we invited artists in to come and to perform to empty halls, but we would record them and people could access it online, and it was real and live, so there was still this sense of connection. Something that previously would have taken us years to stand up, we managed to stand up over one weekend.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
That you were able to do that all the way through COVID as well.
Yeah.
Shutdowns were in place.
Yeah.
The Sydney Opera House is in a unique position, and I know that it faces some environmental challenges, especially with climate change, rising sea level being one of those. How do you plan for the future when it comes to environmental threats that the Opera House may face?
It's certainly true that we face environmental changes. We're a World Heritage listed building, and what happens at the Opera House matters. So we need to look after our own environmental changes, for example, being surrounded by sea on 3 sides, and all of the things that means, being constantly buffeted by salt water. But we also need to think more broadly. We need to think about how we lead and inspire positive change. So the small things that we do, we actually broadcast. We let people know what it is that we're doing because they really care about what we do. So I see our role as both preserving the Opera House for future generations, making it a better place, making it adapted to the future, but at the same time sharing our knowledge and making sure that everyone is invited in to see what it is that we are doing so that we can fulfill our ambition to lead and inspire positive change.
You're on a visit to the Pacific Northwest. What are your plans while you're here?
Well, there is kayaking with orcas, and there is hiking in the North Cascades. But the central reason for coming here is because I have met this fantastic woman, Christy Johnson of Artemis, and she and I have a shared idea, which is that there is currently a leadership vacuum, particularly in the not-for-profit area. And we feel that because of all of the shocks that the world has experienced since COVID, and all sorts of shocks in the last 5 or 6 years, and society as a whole needs what not-for-profit organisations can bring. They are increasingly important to us in health, in welfare, in social cohesion, in so many different areas. And these organisations are incredibly focused on what they do. They're often short of money. They're often seeking the next thing, and there is not enough time spent on building the leaders of the future. And what we want to do is to give organisations a very accessible way of improving the leadership of their organisations and training leaders to build the leaders of the future. And we hope that this will become a movement, an idea that we need to build leaders of the future for the benefit of society as a whole.
We need those leaders, and nonprofits play critical roles.
Yeah.
Okay, Louise, thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Enjoy your
Holly.
time in the Pacific Northwest.
Thank you.